Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. So the causes behind this and understanding the background. Détente had been incredibly successful. The improving of relationships between America and the Soviet Union had worked really, really well throughout the 1970s. Things were looking a lot more positive. However, it all came crashing down at the end of the decade with regards to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In 1978, the communists had taken over in Afghanistan, and obviously the Soviet Union were really, really happy with that. But the people in Afghanistan were not very happy. Throughout 78 and 79, there was some political infighting, and in September 79, Hafizullah Amin took over as president of Afghanistan. Throughout this time, there was gross persecution of the Muslim people within Afghanistan. They were imprisoned, they were tortured, they were executed. And so in order to fight back against this, many Muslim people banded together to form what we call the Mujahideen, and they sought to overthrow the communist rulers of Afghanistan. Now, the Soviet leader Brezhnev did not want to allow this to happen, and he wanted to also send a clear message to the Muslim people within the Soviet Union that the way of doing things was not going to change. So moving on to the events of the invasion. Over the new year, from 1979 into 1980, 50,000 Soviet troops were sent into Afghanistan to restore order and to ensure that the communist government would stay in charge. Amin was shot and he was replaced by a puppet leader called Babrak Kamal. He was clearly under the control of the Soviet Union, and so many of the Afghan soldiers deserted and joined the Mujahideen. So in order to keep control of Afghanistan, more and more Soviet soldiers had to be sent in. In the end, close to 85,000 Soviet soldiers were needed to keep the peace in Afghanistan. The big consequences of this are the Carter Doctrine. Now, US President Carter, he wanted to make a big, strong show of his force, and so he made it clear that the US would use military force to protect its interests in the Persian Gulf, which are predominantly all around oil production. Other big consequences of the Soviet invasion are that there was a complete abandonment of the SALT II treaties. That would no longer go any further, and the US made the decision to covertly fund and assist the Mujahideen. There is a fantastic film you can watch with Tom Hanks called Charlie Wilson's War, which goes into a lot more detail about how that process went on. Also, there was the decision made by the Americans to boycott the Olympics in 1980 that were being held in Moscow. The last real thing to talk about when we talk about the consequences of this invasion are that it is very clearly the end of détente. No longer are the US and the Soviets having any form of cordial relations, and things are very much back to how they had been in the past, with a lot of tension between the two superpowers. Soviet invasion of